When Shaquille O'Neal pulled up to the house on Magnolia Street in Clovis, Louisiana, on a Wednesday morning in October, he was driving a rented sedan with a cracked dashboard and a pine air freshener that smelled nothing like pine. He wore a plain navy t-shirt, jeans, and clean white sneakers with no branding. He had taken 3 planes to get here from Los Angeles. He had not slept on any of them. He sat in the car for a moment before he got out. The house was small. White paint gone gray from the sun in places, gone entirely in others. A blue plastic tarp across the left side of the roof, held flat by 3 old tires and a length of yellow rope. The front yard was kept, grass cut, 2 pots of marigolds on the porch steps, a broom leaning against the railing that had clearly been used that morning. Someone was taking care of what they could take care of. He got out and walked up the front path and knocked. The woman who answered was 74 years old. Small, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and her hands still damp from the kitchen sink. She looked at him the way people look at someone their brain cannot place. He had changed considerably in ways that were obvious. Then she said, "Lord in heaven, that's not Shaq." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "It is." They were still standing in the doorway when a white city truck turned onto Magnolia Street and parked at the curb. A man got out, 51 years old, clipboard under one arm, manila envelope in his hand. He walked up the path without hurrying, looked at the large man at the door, did not recognize him, and, physically stepping to the left, around Shaq, to address the woman behind him, said, "Ma'am, I need you to sign for this. 3rd notice on the roof violation. We've had to move up the condemnation timeline." He held the envelope out past Shaq's arm. He glanced at Shaq briefly. "Sir, this is an administrative matter. Are you family?" Shaq had 4 championship rings, 3 finals MVP awards, a net worth of over $400 million. He was one of the most recognized human beings on earth. He looked at the man's clipboard. He looked at the envelope going into Vera's hands. He looked at the man's face. He said absolutely nothing. He had been looking since the moment he pulled up, and he had noticed 4 things before he knocked. The first was the tarp itself. 3 tires and a rope, but the tires placed at specific intervals to distribute weight evenly, and the rope knotted twice at both hooks. This was not panic. This was problem-solving applied to a situation that had existed long enough to be solved correctly. The second was the workshop door, standing open off the left side of the house. Through it, visible from the front walk, a set of hand tools hung on wooden pegs along the back wall, hammers, saws, squares, levels, arranged in an order that was not random, arranged the way a person arranges things they intend to find again. The tools were clean. The yard around them showed the slow dishevelment of a property losing its fight with time. The tools were kept. Someone went in there regularly, not to work, to maintain. The third was the level, longest tool on the wall. A wooden-handled spirit level, old, with something burned into the handle that he could not read from the walk. Dark wood at the grip, worn smooth. The fourth was above the front door, carved shallow into the doorframe itself, deliberate and patient, the kind of marking that takes time, CS+V. M. 1978, he looked at it when Vera opened the door. He said nothing about it. He said nothing about any of it. He filed every one away and waited. Now here is the part nobody in Clovis understood yet, including Vera herself. Shaquille O'Neal had not flown 3 planes across the country on a Wednesday in October to assess whether the situation was real. He already knew it was real. He had known for 6 weeks, since a handwritten letter arrived at his foundation's mailing address, 4 pages in careful, deliberate cursive, addressed to Shaq or whoever reads these, from an 81-year-old deacon named Ray Thibodeau, who had spent 11 days asking his granddaughter to help him find the right address. The letter described 3 things without complaint or decoration: a roof that had been leaking for 2 rainy seasons, a diabetes medication that cost more per month than Vera's income, and a condemnation proceeding moving forward at a pace that suggested someone very much wanted it finished. Shaq had read that letter 4 times. He was not here to assess. The assessment was done. His attorney had filed a legal hold on the condemnation proceedings 48 hours ago. A licensed contractor had completed a structural survey of the house last week. The restoration crew was scheduled to begin the following Monday. He was here for one reason. He needed to see Vera's face when he told her. And he needed to ask her one question about the house before anyone touched anything inside it. What the man with the clipboard had absolutely no idea about, standing on that porch with his manila envelope, was that the proceeding he had come to advance had already been stopped. The paperwork was in a law office in Baton Rouge. It had been done. Stay with us for the full story. Because what this town finds out about the gift and about what the man with the clipboard discovers inside that house will reach you in a place you did not expect to be reached. Lucille O'Neill, Shaq's mother, had grown up on the west side of Clovis, Louisiana, on a street called Geneva, where every house had a porch, and every porch had somebody sitting on it during the good months. She and Vera Mae Ellis had known each other from the age of 7. Same school, same church, same lunch table, all the way through. They had moved through girlhood together the way girls move when they have someone solid beside them, with a particular confidence that comes not from being fearless, but from being known. When Lucille left Clovis as a young woman, following Philip Harrison's military assignments from Newark to Georgia to Germany and beyond, she and Vera stayed in touch in the way people stayed in touch before everything was instant. Letters that cost time to write, phone calls that cost money to make and were therefore kept short and therefore meant more. Vera was the person Lucille called when Shaq was born, when things were hard, when things were good. Vera was a thread running through every important year. Shaq came to Clovis with his mother 3 times as a child. He remembered each visit. Not for the town, though he remembered the particular weight of Louisiana heat, the way it pressed rather than passed. He remembered Vera's kitchen, and he remembered Calvin. Calvin Simmons was 42 years old the first time Shaq met him. A quiet, deliberate man with hands that seemed too large even on a large frame, shaped by 30 years of working wood and concrete and steel into something more than hands. He had built the house on Magnolia Street himself, beginning in 1978, buying materials when the money was there and stopping when it wasn't, working evenings and weekends alongside his day job. 3 years of his own time. He finished it in 1981. He and Vera had lived in it every day of their lives since. Calvin had a carpenter's way of speaking. Patient, specific, he ended sentences with a pause that meant he expected the other person to think. He told young Shaq on the second visit, when Shaq was 12 years old and helping in the workshop the way a large 12-year-old helps. By handing tools and staying out of the way, he told him, "A man's hands either take or they give. Nothing in between. Every single thing you do, you got to ask yourself, which one am I doing right now?" Shaq had not been asked to memorize it. He had never written it down. It had simply never left. Calvin Simmons died 17 years ago of a heart attack at 54, in the workshop he had built off the left side of the house. Vera found him the next morning, seated at his workbench with a half-finished cabinet door in front of him, looking like a man who had simply gone still at the end of his work. Vera kept the tools exactly as he had left them. She went into the workshop every Tuesday. She wiped every surface down. She replaced the pegboard hooks when they rusted. She kept the long wooden-handled spirit level dusted and hanging on the same peg it had occupied for 31 years, the one he had burned his initials into, CS, in his own hand, in the wood of the grip. The house was 43 years old. It needed a new roof and a leveled foundation in the northeast corner and 2 windows that no longer opened properly. But it had been built by a man who did not cut corners, and even under strain, even under the tarp, even losing 2 years of slow ground, it was holding. The way things hold when they were built by someone who thought about the people who would live inside them long after he was finished. Shaq went to LSU at 18. First overall pick in 1992. 4 championships. 3 finals MVPs. A net worth over $400 million. He built things. He still heard Calvin's question when he looked at what he was building. Dennis Archie had grown up in Clovis, 3rd generation. His grandfather had worked the paper mill. His father, Gerald Archie, had run Archie Construction out of a shop on Route 9 for 31 years. Grain storage, gymnasium additions, residential repairs, the kind of community contracting that makes a small town function. Dennis had grown up around building things. He had gone into housing inspection because he genuinely believed that living conditions mattered, and that someone had to hold the standard between a building that was safe and one that was not. He had held it for 14 years. He had been good at it. 8 months ago, a Baton Rouge development company called Pelican Land Partners had presented the Clovis City Council with a riverfront revitalization proposal requiring the acquisition of 11 properties on the south end of town. Properties already on the violation list. Already candidates for condemnation. The company was not aggressive about it. They had offered fair market value, prepared glossy renderings, promised tax revenue and construction jobs. The council voted 6-1 to proceed. Dennis had been the one asking questions. What happened to the residents who could not relocate? He had been told the broader community benefit outweighed the individual displacement, in the tone of someone who has already had this conversation with people above them and lost. He understood, without anyone saying it plainly, what he had just been handed. He had a daughter at Tulane and a mother in assisted living in Shreveport. He did not resign. He had been filing notices on Vera Simmons's property for 4 months. The morning he dropped the 3rd notice in her mailbox, he sat in his truck in front of that house for 11 minutes before he drove away. He looked at the tarp on the roof. He looked at the marigolds on the porch steps. He did the math the way men do when they have decided on a course of action and are hoping the math will change the answer. It did not change the answer. He drove away. He went to the next property on the list. He was not a bad man. He was a man at the bottom of a decision made above him, in a job he could not afford to lose, in a town where he had spent his whole life and where some of the people in those houses had known his father. Inside the house on Magnolia Street, 5 people. Vera Mae Simmons at the kitchen doorway, envelope in hand, reading glasses still up on her forehead. The stillness of a woman who has been receiving difficult news from envelopes long enough that she has made her peace with the arrival, if not the content. Dennis Archie inside the door, working through the timeline for the November 8th review, in the measured language of someone who has delivered this information enough times that the words have worn smooth. Shaq at the kitchen table, hands flat on the surface, face entirely still. In the front room, visible through the doorway, a framed photograph stood on the side table. A man in front of a newly finished house, arms crossed, squinting into the sun, wearing a work belt. 1981. Calvin Simmons, 42 years old, the year the house was done. And across the street, at the window of the house directly opposite, a woman named Paulette Dumas, 67, retired school cafeteria cook, stood with a dish towel in both hands. She had brought Vera dinner every Tuesday for 3 years. Not when asked, Vera did not ask. Paulette simply came because she had decided to, and because she understood that some people will go hungry before they will speak up. She had watched the white city truck stop. She had watched the man with the clipboard get out. She had watched the large stranger in the navy shirt get out of the rental car. She had not moved from that window. At his house 3 streets over, Deacon Ray Thibodeau, 81, legs that did not carry him far anymore, sat in his recliner with a Bible in his lap and waited. He had done his part 6 weeks ago. He had written the letter. He had asked his granddaughter to find the right address. He had mailed it on a Tuesday without telling Vera, because Vera would have told him not to. Back in the kitchen, Dennis had stopped talking. He looked at Shaq steadily. "Sir, I'm going to need to know if you're here in a legal capacity, because if you are, I'm a friend of the family," Shaq said. The first words he had spoken. Dennis made a note. He turned back to Vera. "After November 8th, if the violations haven't been remediated, we'll move forward with the formal. She won't be going to that review," Shaq said. The room went quiet. Not gradually. All at once. Dennis Archie turned around fully. He looked at the man at the kitchen table the way a person looks at a sentence they were not expecting to have to parse. "Sir," he said, controlled, "I don't know who you are, but this proceeding is a matter of city record. It is not optional, and it is not—" "I know what it is," Shaq said. Still calm, still seated, hands still flat on the table. "I know the timeline. I know what November 9th looks like if November 8th goes through. I also know that there are 8 other families on this block with notices from your office, and that the development company acquiring these properties after condemnation made a presentation to the city council on February 14th. I read the minutes. The refrigerator hummed. The tarp on the roof shifted once in the October wind. Nobody moved. Outside, Paulette Dumas had put down the dish towel. She was watching the window of the house across the street with her full attention. Dennis said carefully, "I'm going to need to know who I'm talking to." Before you hear what happened next, the voice continues. You need to understand what was in the inside pocket of the jacket draped over that kitchen chair. 1 sealed envelope, already signed, already filed, already done. And the 4th thing Shaq had come to do, which was not a document, and not a legal maneuver, and not a confrontation. It was a question. 1 question for Vera. Something he had flown 3 planes to ask in person, because some things you do not do over the phone. Stay with us. Shaq reached into the inside pocket of the jacket on the chair back. He set 1 sealed envelope on the kitchen table. He slid it toward Dennis, not toward Vera. "Open it," he said. Dennis looked at him. He looked at the envelope. He opened it. Inside were 3 documents, paper clipped together. The first was a legal notice from a Baton Rouge law firm, a hold filed on all condemnation proceedings against 412 Magnolia Street, effective 2 days prior, countersigned by the parish court clerk. The second was a healthcare enrollment card with Vera's name printed in the member slot, all prescriptions, all specialist visits, no premium, no copay, issued under the O'Neill Family Foundation healthcare program. The third was a 1-page restoration plan. Contractor. Start date, Monday. Scope, new roof, northeast foundation, 2 window frames, exterior and interior. Projected completion, 6 weeks. Dennis read all 3 without rushing. He set them down. He looked at Shaq across the table. Something was moving through him that had not been present when he walked through the door. "I know you were doing a job," Shaq said. "I know the job was put on you by people with different interests than the people living in these houses. What you do with that is between you and your conscience." He looked at Dennis evenly. "The other 8 families on this block are going to receive similar documentation in the next 30 days. The development company will need to find a different piece of ground." Dennis looked at the clipboard on the counter. He looked at the envelope that Vera had set beside it, still unopened, his office's return address on the front. He did not pick up his clipboard. Shaq turned to Vera. "I have one question," he said. "Before the crew starts Monday, I need to know, is there anything in this house you want us to make sure we save?" Vera did not hesitate. She looked toward the window, toward the workshop beyond the glass. "The level," she said, "on the wall in the shop. The long one, with his initials on the handle. We'll put it back on the same peg," Shaq said. She pressed her lips together and nodded. She did not trust her voice for anything more than that. Shaq stood from the chair. He looked at Dennis one final time. "You've been in this town your whole life," he said. "The people on this street built it same as anyone. That ought to count for something when you go back to your office." He picked up his jacket. He walked out. Dennis Archie had not moved. He was standing beside the kitchen counter, holding nothing, looking through the doorway into the front room. Not at the doorway, at the photograph on the side table. The man with his arms crossed, squinting into the sun, in front of the house he had just finished. Vera noticed. She followed his eyes. He said, "Your husband, Calvin Simmons. He was a carpenter." 32 years, Vera said. "Did he ever work for Archie Construction?" "On Route 9? The kitchen changed. Vera's face moved through several things in a short span of time. "He worked for Gerald Archie for 12 years, she said. "From 1969 to 1981. Gerald Archie gave Calvin his first real job after he came back from the service. Calvin used to say that man treated him right when not everyone did." She looked at the name on the clipboard Dennis had left on the counter. She looked at his face. "That was your daddy?" Dennis said, "Yes, ma'am." He was very still. He looked around the kitchen, at the walls, at the corner angles, at the window frame. He was looking at it the way a man looks at work when he understands the work, when he can read in the joint and the level what the person who built it understood about the trade. His father's standard was in it. Gerald Archie had not hired men who cut corners. He had taught the men he hired not to. And one of those men had taken 12 years of that teaching home and built this house. His father had talked about Calvin Simmons. Not often. Gerald Archie was not a man who talked often. But when he talked about people who understood the work, Calvin came up. Best eye for level I ever saw. The kind of man who tears out a full day because it is 2 degrees off, and nobody would have known but him. Dennis had not connected the name on the violation file, Simmons V412 Magnolia, to the man in those stories. He had processed hundreds of cases. He had processed this one as a case number, not a name. Not Calvin. Not the man his father had spent 31 years respecting. He looked at the clipboard on the counter. His own name at the bottom of the 3rd notice. His office's address on the envelope. He had spent 8 months filing paperwork to condemn the house that his father's legacy, his father's training, his father's standards had made possible. He had been trying, without knowing it, to put a price on his own inheritance and move it into someone else's ledger. He picked up the envelope from the counter, the 3rd notice, his 3rd notice, and he held it for a moment. Then he set it back down. He did not take it with him when he walked out the door. He sat in his truck in front of 412 Magnolia Street for a long time. He made one phone call. When he drove away, he went toward his office. He did not stop at any of the other 8 properties on the list. Paulette Dumas, watching from across the street, saw all of this without being able to hear any of it. She picked up her phone and called Vera. She said, "What in the world is happening over there?" Here is what each of them walked away carrying. Deacon Ray Thibodeau, 81 years old, who wrote one letter and spent 11 days finding the right address, received a phone call from Shaq's office on a Thursday afternoon. He cried, which he had not done since his wife's funeral. He told the assistant to tell Shaq, "Thank you, son." He hung up. That was everything that needed to be said, and he believed in keeping things to what needed to be said. Paulette Dumas, who had brought dinner every Tuesday for 3 years to a woman who would never ask for help, did not stop on Tuesdays. She simply began bringing it to a house with a whole roof and a working furnace and 2 windows that opened all the way. She considers this an improvement. She has changed nothing else. Dennis Archie filed amended paperwork on all 8 Magnolia Street properties the following morning. The Pelican Land Partners proposal has not been discussed since. He came back to 412 Magnolia Street once on an afternoon when he knew the house was empty and sat in his truck for a long time. He left without getting out. And on a Tuesday morning in late November, when the restoration crew had gone and the scaffolding was down and the street was quiet again, Vera Mae Simmons walked back into the house on Magnolia Street for the first time in 6 weeks. The roof was whole. The northeast corner was level. Both windows opened. She walked through the front room. She walked to the workshop door and pushed it open. The morning light came in the way it always had, at the angle Calvin had accounted for when he positioned the door, because he had thought about the light. On the back wall, on the same peg it had been on for 31 years, the wooden, handled spirit level, cleaned, with CS burned into the grip. She touched it once. She stood in the workshop for a long time. Then she went back through the house to the front door and stood in the frame. She looked up at the carving above her head, cleaned now and sealed, preserved in the wood, CS plus VM 1978. She pressed 2 fingers against it, against his initials, against the year. She said, quietly, to no one and to one person specifically, he'd have liked this. 4 words. If you were with us the whole way, through the 3 planes, the 1 envelope, the question about the level on the wall, then you know those 4 words were not about the roof or the foundation or the restored door frame. They were about the question Calvin asked a 12-year-old boy in a workshop on Magnolia Street 40 years ago. A man's hands either take or they give. Drop a comment right now and tell us where in the world you are watching from, and if there is a Vera in your life, someone who held on, who asked for nothing, who deserves everything, leave their name below. They deserve to be said out loud. If this story reached you, the like button is right there. Not for us, for Calvin. For every person who built something worth protecting with their hands and their time. Subscribe if you haven't. This community is built on one belief, that the quiet moves are the ones that last. There are more of these. Next, he walked into the dealership in sweats, and they told him nothing on the lot was in his price range. He sat down in the front office and waited. What happened next closed the building for the rest of the day. That one is coming. We will see you there.